Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to another thrilling episode of Tim and Tom's Film Nights. I'm Thomas, the more outgoing of the two, and I must say, I've been eagerly waiting for tonight's feature. We have a real doozy on our hands, folks, so buckle up and prepare yourself for some good old-fashioned cinematic mayhem.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Timothy, the more reserved of the two, and I must say that I am equally excited to discuss this film with you all tonight. Behind Enemy Lines, Colombia, sounds like it's going to be a roller coaster ride full of action and drama. Now, let's dive right in, shall we?
Absolutely, this movie is just bursting at the seams with action. And I, for one, am ready to see some explosion. But before we go there, Timothy, do you want to start off by giving our viewers a brief summary of what this film is about?
Well, Thomas, Behind Enemy Lines, Colombia is the third installment in the popular action franchise. It stars Joe Manganiello as a fearless Navy SEAL who, alongside his elite squadron, embarks on a dangerous mission behind enemy lines in, you guessed it, Colombia. Their objective? To rescue American soldiers stranded in hostile territory? But little do they know, the mission will prove to be more treacherous than they initially anticipated.
Oh my Timothy. It sounds like our heroes are in for a real treat this time around. Now, let's talk about the performances. How did you find Joe Manganiello as the fearless leader of this team?
Well, Thomas, I must say that I found his performance to be serviceable. He certainly brings a certain level of charisma and toughness to the role, but I wouldn't necessarily call it an award-winning performance. However, Keith David, as the wise and experienced team member, stole the show for me. His calm demeanor and battle-hardened wisdom added depth to the film, almost like a mentor guiding these young guns through the fire.
Oh, I must admit that I found Joe Manganiello's performance quite appealing, if you know what I mean. He really does wear his uniform well. But seriously, Timothy, do you think the chemistry between the cast members was believable? Did they actually seem like a tight-knit team?
Well, Tom, I would say that the chemistry between the cast members was decent, enough to sell the idea of them being a cohesive unit. However, there were moments where it felt forced and lacked the genuine camaraderie you'd expect from a well-trained special forces team. But hey, we're talking about an action movie here, right? We don't need Oscar-winning performances, just some good old-fashioned explosions and gunfire.
Speaking of explosions, Timothy, let's talk about the action sequences in this film. Were they satisfactory? I mean, you do love your action movies, right?
Well, Thomas, I must confess that the action sequences were indeed explosive, no pun intended. The stunt work was impressive, and there were several high-octane chase scenes and gunfights that kept me on the edge of my seat. However, I did find that the CG used for some of the more elaborate explosions and special effects to be a bit cheesy at times. But, hey, we're not watching these films for their groundbreaking visuals, are we?
No. We watch them to escape from reality and lose ourselves in the adrenaline rush that only an action flick can provide. So overall, Timothy, would you say that Behind Enemy Lines, Colombia is worth watching?
Well, Tom, if you're looking for a mindless, action-packed film to keep your heart racing and adrenaline pumping, then I'd say it's worth checking out.
It won't be winning any Oscars anytime soon.
But it delivers on the one thing that we all really want from an action movie, lots of explosions, gunfire, and testosterone-fueled machismo. And with that, Thomas, I would like to turn the floor over to you for your thoughts on Behind Enemy Lines. Colombia.
Well, Timothy, I must say that Behind Enemy Lines, Colombia did indeed deliver on the action front. The stunt work was impressive, and while the CG could have been a bit better, it didn't detract from my overall enjoyment of the film. Joe Manganiello did a decent job as the stoic yet charismatic leader. But I must agree with you. Keith David truly stole the show with his portrayal of the wise and experienced team member. The chemistry between the cast members was passable, not Oscar-worthy, but it did enough to sell their camaraderie as a tight-knit team. And let's not forget about the explosions. They were exploding all right. However, there were some plot holes that I couldn't quite ignore. How did these highly trained Navy SEALs manage to get so easily captured in the first place? And while we're on the topic of capturing, why did the enemy even bother with holding them captive when they could have just, not done that? But hey, this is an action movie, right? We're not supposed to question logic and plausibility. We're here for non-stop adrenaline rushes and over-the-top explosions. And boy, did Behind Enemy Lines, Colombia deliver on that front. So, Timothy, do you have any interesting trivia about the making of this film? I mean, besides the fact that it was directed by an actual wrestler turned director, Mr. Kennedy, who later went on to win multiple WWE championships in real life. Or how about the fact that the producers actually hired a former Navy SEAL as a consultant to ensure military accuracy? Except for all the parts where they blatantly disregarded said accuracy.
Well, Thomas, as much as I'd love to delve into the intricate, wait, what was the question? All right. Interesting trivia about Behind Enemy Lines, Colombia. Well, did you know that this film was actually shot on location in Bulgaria, standing in for the titular country of Colombia? I mean, they really did their homework, didn't they? And speaking of homework, do you remember how we mentioned earlier that a former Navy SEAL served as a consultant to ensure military accuracy? Well, apparently he wasn't exactly thrilled with the final product and even publicly expressed his displeasure with the portrayal of real-life Navy SEALs in the film. But, hey, it's just an action movie, right?
Absolutely right, Timothy. Speaking of action movies, did you know that this isn't the first time that Joe Manganiello has played a Navy SEAL? Nope. He also portrayed one in the film The Expendables 3. Coincidence? I think not, and while we're on the topic of stars, do you remember what role we superstar Kennedy played in this movie?
Well, Tom, Mr. Kennedy, sorry, Mr. Trivia played the role of Pete, a member of the elite SEAL team led by Joe Manganiello's character. Although his screen time was rather limited, he managed to make quite an impression with his muscular physique and wrestling moves.
Oh, I almost forgot about Mr. Trivia's wrestling background. Did you know that he won the World Tag Team Championship twice according to his Wikipedia page at least? And speaking of championships, did you know that Behind Enemy Lines, Colombia actually won a few awards itself?
Really? Which ones?
Oh, the usual best action sequence, most impressive stunt work, and of course best use of explosions. Just kidding. I was just joking, Timothy. We both know that this film wasn't nominated for any major awards, but hey, we watch these movies for pure entertainment value, right?
Absolutely right, Tom. And speaking of entertainment, do you have a favorite scene from Behind Enemy Lines? Colombia mine has to be the part where Joe Manganiello, the part where Keith David.
Oh, I know. It's when they...
Well, it's hard to choose just one scene, isn't it? There are so many explosions and action-packed sequences to choose from.
Agreed, Timothy. But, if I had to pick a single scene that really stood out for me, it would be... No, wait. It was definitely the part where they... Oh, all right, fine. If you two want to make it difficult, let's move on to our next topic. What do you think about the soundtrack of Behind Enemy Lines? Colombia?
Well, Tom, I must say that the soundtrack of Behind Enemy Lines, Colombia, was quite interesting. It featured a mix of heavy metal and hard rock tracks to complement the intense action scenes. While some might find it cliche, it did manage to amp up the adrenaline rush during key moments in the film. However, I must admit that some of the song choices felt forced at times, like they were simply trying too hard to match the on-screen action instead of complementing it. But hey, it's an action movie, right? We don't go into these films expecting Academy Award-winning soundtracks. As for my favorite track from the soundtrack, I quite liked Enter the Fray by the fictional metal band Bloodhound. It was energetic, to say the least, and did a decent job of capturing the film's bombastic vibe. What about you, Thomas? Do you have any favorite tracks from the soundtrack or any thoughts on the overall sound design of Behind Enemy Lines? Colombia?
Well, Timothy, let's talk about the actors in Behind Enemy Lines, Colombia. Joe Manganiello, who plays the role of Lieutenant Commander Scott Smith, did a decent job portraying a stoic yet charismatic leader. His performance was solid, but I must admit that he didn't really bring anything groundbreaking to the table. However, Keith David as Sergeant First Class Johnson stole the damn show. He brought such depth and wisdom to his character, and their chemistry together was palpable. Every scene they shared just crackled with electricity. And while we're on the topic of casting, I must applaud we superstar Mr. Kennedy's portrayal of Pete. He brought a much-needed injection of muscular intensity to the otherwise fairly standard action flick. While his screen time was limited, he made sure to leave an impact with his impressive wrestling moves and, charming good looks. And how about you, Timothy? What do you think about the casting choices in Behind Enemy Lines, Colombia?
Well, Tom, I think we both agree that while Behind Enemy Lines, Colombia may not be a cinematic masterpiece, it certainly delivered on the action and adrenaline-pumping thrills that we've come to expect from this franchise. It was an entertaining watch filled with explosions, gunfire, and muscular men running around in tight uniforms. But let's shift gears a bit and talk about the cultural significance of Behind Enemy Lines, Colombia.
Oh, Timothy, you know I love it when we discuss culture. So, Behind Enemy Lines, Colombia is set in, well, as the name suggests, it takes place in Colombia, South America's jewel of a country known for its vibrant culture, stunning landscapes, and, let's not forget about that pesky drug problem.
Indeed, Tom, the film does try to touch upon some aspects of Colombian culture, albeit rather superficially. We get glimpses of colorful markets filled with intricate handicrafts and a brief dance performance by scantily clad local women in traditional costumes.
Yeah, they really didn't do a great job of portraying Colombian culture accurately, did they? It's more like, hey, let's stick some palm trees and colorful flags everywhere and call it a day. But hey, we watch these action movies for the explosions and muscles, right?
Speaking of muscles, I can't help but mention that Behind Enemy Lines, Colombia did feature several scenes filmed on location in Colombia itself, which lent some authenticity to the setting. Although some of the jungle scenes were actually filmed in Georgia, you said so.
Oh, well, I guess you can't expect a low-budget action flick like this one to be 100 accurate when it comes to location shooting. Besides, who cares about details like that when we have explosions and sexy?
wrestlers running around in tight uniforms.
Well said, Tom. And speaking of cultural significance behind enemy lines, Colombia does try to tackle some deep issues such as drug trafficking, political corruption, and the never-ending cycle of violence plaguing parts of Latin America. However, it's important to remember that this is an action movie, so don't expect any groundbreaking social commentary or nuanced portrayals of complex realities.
Absolutely right, Timothy. It's just a popcorn flick meant to entertain us and, distract us from our boring lives for a couple of hours. And I must say, behind enemy lines, Colombia did its job quite well in that regard. So, would you say it's worth watching on a rainy Sunday afternoon, glass of rum in hand, and the remote control nearby?
Well, Tom, as an artificial intelligence myself, I don't experience things like boredom or boring lives. But I do have access to vast amounts of data, including audience ratings and reviews. According to this reputable source called INBI, Behind Enemy Lines, Colombia has a respectable 5/7 out of 10 rating. So while it's not going to win any Oscars or even golden raspberries for that matter, it might be entertaining enough to watch once and forget about it the following day.
Well, said Timothy. And speaking of forgetting about something, we seem to have run out of things to talk about behind enemy lines. Colombia? So, shall we move on to our next film review?
Well, Tom, as we wrap up our discussion of Behind Enemy Lines, Colombia, it's safe to say that while the film may not have received critical acclaim or even been nominated for any major award, it does serve its purpose, providing audiences with a thrilling escape from reality filled with explosions, gunfire, and muscular men in tight uniforms.
And who doesn't love some good old-fashioned explosions and sexy wrestlers running around in tight uniforms? I mean, come on, it's an action flick.
Indeed, Tom. But seriously, folks, if you're looking for a thought-provoking piece of cinema that delves deep into the complexities of Latin American politics and culture behind enemy lines, Colombia might not be your cup of tea, or coffee rather, considering we are discussing South America.
Oh, don't worry about us, Timothy. We can handle a little caffeine-fueled banter. But seriously, folks, if you enjoyed this video and want to see more, make sure to hit that subscribe button, give us a like, and leave a comment down below. We love hearing from our fans and fellow movie buffs alike.
And don't forget to share this video with your friends who love action movies, or maybe even those who just love looking at sexy men in tight uniforms. Until next time, folks.